May 12, 1946. Dawn breaks over Webster County, Iowa. Two American farmers stand in a field of dying potato plants, staring at a death sentence from the finest agricultural minds in the nation. The experts have spoken, total crop failure. Nothing can be done. But 200 feet away, a German prisoner of war is about to say four words that will change everything. I can save them. What happened next would pit a Bavarian grandmother's 200-year-old recipe against Ivy League science. It would prove that sometimes the most powerful knowledge doesn't come with a PhD, and it would show the world that in America, even enemies can become heroes if they're brave enough to speak up. James Hawthorne kneels in the dirt at 5:47 in the morning. He's 47 years old, third generation on this land. His calloused fingers tremble as they touch a potato leaf gone brown and soft with disease. The sun rises behind him, painting the Iowa sky in shades of amber and rose, but James doesn't notice the beauty. His eyes are locked on the death spreading through his fields. 240 acres, 15 years of farming. The best crop he'd seen in all that time just 3 weeks ago. Now it's dying, all of it. Every single plant turning brown from the inside out, rotting while they still stand in neat rows that suddenly look like grave markers. The smell hits him, that distinctive rot, sweet and putrid at once. The smell of failure, the smell of bankruptcy, the smell of his daughter Sarah losing the only home she's ever known. Robert Crawford appears through the morning mist. He's 52, neighbor and friend, a man whose 160 acres border James's land to the west. Robert's face tells the same story. Devastation barely held in check. Blight, Robert says quietly. The word tastes like ash in his mouth. Late blight, James confirms. Worst outbreak I've ever seen. Robert's hands shake. 4 children at home. A wife who trusts him to provide. $3,500 borrowed just last month to repair the barn. If we lose this crop, he starts to say, but he can't finish. They both know what total crop failure means. Bankruptcy, foreclosure, the end of everything their families built. The university agronomist had been clear 2 days ago when the test results came back. Nothing can stop late blight once it takes hold. Your crops are finished. Start planning for next year. But there is no next year if you can't survive this year. The bank doesn't care about weather or disease or bad luck. The bank only cares about payments. And without this harvest, there will be no payments. James stands slowly, his knees protesting. He's about to speak when a voice cuts through the morning air. A woman's voice. Accented. Careful. Mr. Patterson, I am sorry to interrupt. Both men turn. Margaret Muller stands at the edge of the field, her German prisoner uniform marking her as one of the enemy, even though the war ended a year ago. She's been working in James's barn for 6 weeks now. Quiet, respectful, never caused trouble. But she's never spoken to him uninvited before. Never inserted herself into anything beyond her assigned tasks. I can save them, she says in careful English. Her blue eyes are steady, certain. I know how to stop the blight. My grandmother's method from Bavaria. It works, always works. James stares at her. So does Robert. The university agronomist with his PhD from Iowa State had just declared their crops dead. Modern science had given up. But this German prisoner, this woman who'd been their enemy months ago, is claiming she has a solution. Before we continue, I need to ask you something. If you're a man who remembers when America was built on hard work, common sense, and respect for wisdom, no matter where it came from, consider subscribing right now. This channel tells stories the history books forgot. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories that prove the greatest generation earned that name for a reason. We're going to share a story today that will restore your faith in American ingenuity, show you why traditional knowledge matters, and remind you what made this country great. In the next 45 minutes, you'll discover how a Bavarian farmer's daughter challenged Harvard-educated scientists and won. The shocking moment when America's top agricultural expert had to admit he was completely wrong. Why this German POW risked deportation to save farms belonging to people who'd been her enemies. And how her grandmother's ancient method is still saving crops worldwide today, protecting millions of tons of food and thousands of families from ruin. This isn't just about potatoes. It's about listening to wisdom regardless of where it comes from. It's about courage. And it's about what makes America truly exceptional. But first, let me ask you this. Who was this German woman who claimed she could do what America's finest scientists said was impossible? And why would a prisoner of war risk everything to help people who'd been her enemies just months before, 6 weeks earlier? April 1st, 1946. A military truck rolls to a stop at the Patterson farm. 12 German prisoners of war climb down their movements, careful, their faces blank. They wear the standard POW uniform, the letters clearly visible. These are the conquered, the defeated. Men and one woman who 6 months ago wore different uniforms and served a different flag. Margaret Muller is 34 years old. She steps onto Iowa soil with no possessions except the clothes on her back and the knowledge in her head. She's 5'3", 120 pounds, compact and weathered from years of farm work. Her brown hair is pulled back tight. Her blue eyes take in everything but reveal nothing. She was born in Oberammergau, Bavaria, a village nestled in the Alps where her family had farmed for 7 generations. Not a grand estate, just 45 hectares of good soil where they grew potatoes and barley and raised dairy cows. Simple people, traditional people, the kind who distrusted Hitler's National Socialists and their promises of glory. The war took everything from Margaret Muller. 1943. Her brother Klaus, 28 years old, died at Stalingrad, frozen to death in the Russian winter while fighting a war he never believed in. 1944. Her father Friedrich, 58, collapsed in the fields while doing forced labor for the German military. Heart attack, dead before he hit the ground. February 1945. Allied bombers mistook Oberammergau for a military target. The bombs fell on a Tuesday afternoon. Her grandmother Anna, 74 years old, died in the rubble of the village church where she'd prayed every Sunday for 60 years. Her mother Helga, 54, disappeared in the chaos, presumed dead. The family farm's 7 generations of careful tending reduced to burned timbers and scorched earth. When Germany surrendered in April 1945, Margaret was picked up with thousands of other displaced persons. Not a Nazi. Her family had never joined the party. But she was German, and Germany had lost, so she became a prisoner. Processed through a facility in New York. Shipped to Iowa, where American farms desperately needed labor after so many men had gone to war. She carried nothing with her. No photographs, no letters, no keepsakes. Everything physical had burned. But she carried something they couldn't take. She carried the knowledge her grandmother Anna had taught her. The old ways, the traditional methods, the things that modern farming had mostly forgotten. And among those forgotten things was a method for fighting late blight, a disease that had caused the Irish potato famine a century earlier, a disease that could destroy an entire crop in 2 weeks, a disease that even now in 1946, even with all of modern science, had no reliable cure. But Anna Muller's grandmother had known how to fight it, and she taught Anna, and Anna had taught Margaret. The question was whether anyone in America would listen to a German prisoner who claimed to know something their own experts didn't. Webster County, Iowa. Population 3,200. A tight-knit farming community where everyone knew everyone. Where American flags flew from every porch. Where men who'd fought in 2 world wars still carried the scars, physical and emotional, of battle against Germany. Into this community came 12 German prisoners, and not everyone was happy about it. Harold Brennan stands in his farmhouse office on a Wednesday evening in mid-April. He's 56 years old, the wealthiest farmer in the county, with 480 acres of prime land. He's also chairman of the Webster County Farmers Association, which means when he speaks, people listen. On his desk sits a framed photograph. Marine Sergeant Kevin Brennan, 23 years old, in full-dress uniform. The photo was taken 6 months before Kevin shipped out to the Pacific. 6 months before he died on the black sand beaches of Iwo Jima on February 26, 1945. Next to the photo is a folded American flag in a presentation case, the flag that draped Kevin's coffin. And beside that, in a glass frame, the Purple Heart, awarded posthumously. Harold's hands rest on the desk, weathered and scarred from decades of farm work. But there's another scar, invisible, carved deep in his lungs. Verdun, 1918. Mustard gas. He'd survived, but his lungs never fully recovered. Every breath is a reminder of what Germany did to him 28 years ago. And now Germans are here, on American soil, eating American food, sleeping in American beds, working American farms. Harold had called a special meeting of the Farmers Association. Webster County, Grange Hall, 7:30 on a Wednesday night. 42 farmers packed into the meeting room, the air thick with pipe smoke and tension. Harold stood at the front. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice rough from damaged lungs. "My son Kevin died on Iwo Jima fighting the Germans' allies. He was 23 years old. He never got to come home, never got to marry, never gave me grandchildren. He's buried in the Pacific while those Germans eat American food, sleep in American beds, work American soil." The room was silent. Every man there knew Harold's pain. Many had lost sons or brothers or friends. "Some of you think I'm being unreasonable," Harold continued. "You think I should move on, but every time I see one of those POWs, I see the uniform that killed my boy. And I can't forget. I won't forget." James Hawthorne stood up slowly. "Harold, every man in this room understands your pain. Many of us lost people we loved. But the Geneva Convention says these prisoners must be treated humanely. They're assigned to farms that need labor. We can't just refuse them because of where they were born." Harold turned on him. "The Geneva Convention didn't bury my son Jim. Did it bury yours?" The tension crackled like lightning about to strike. James had no answer. He hadn't lost a child. Couldn't imagine that particular hell. The vote was close. 18-14 in favor of using POW labor. The community was divided, and Harold Brennan walked out of that meeting with rage in his heart and a vow on his lips. If those Germans caused any trouble, any at all, he would make sure they were sent away. Harold didn't know it yet, but in 6 weeks, when James Hawthorne's crops started dying, he would see it as divine justice. And when a German woman offered a solution, his hatred would face its greatest test. What happened next would force him to choose between his grief and his conscience. While Harold nursed his hatred, Margaret Muller worked in silence. Her job was simple: clean the barn, organize tools, feed the livestock. Stay out of sight, stay out of trouble. But Margaret couldn't help but notice the potato fields, and what she saw terrified her. Evening at the Patterson farmhouse. The kitchen is warm, filled with the smell of chicken stew. James sits at the table exhausted from a 14-hour day in the fields. His daughter Sarah moves between stove and table, serving dinner with the practiced efficiency of someone who's been running a household since age 12. Sarah is 15 years old, finishing her last year of middle school. She's tall for her age, with her mother's dark hair and her father's steady gray eyes. 3 years ago, her mother Mary died of tuberculosis. Sarah had to grow up fast, cooking, cleaning, managing a farmhouse, while her father worked dawn to dusk to keep the farm running alone. "Papa," Sarah says quietly, setting a bowl of stew in front of him, "do I really have to teach English to that German woman?" James looks at his daughter. He sees the fear in her eyes. The propaganda from the war years is still fresh. Germans are monsters, baby killers, evil incarnate. That's what the posters said. That's what the newsreels showed. "Sarah," he says gently, "I want you to teach Margaret English so she can work better. That's all. But Papa, she's German. They killed people. They started the war." James sets down his spoon. "Not Margaret's sweetheart. She's just a farmer like us. The war is over. We have to learn to live together now." Sarah's hands twist in her apron. "But what if she's dangerous? What if she tries to hurt us?" James reaches across the table and takes his daughter's hand. "Look at me, Sarah. Margaret Muller lost her entire family in the war. Her brother, her father, her grandmother, her mother. Everything. She has nothing left except the knowledge her grandmother taught her. She's not here to hurt us. She's here because she has nowhere else to go." Sarah's eyes fill with tears. "Like Mama," she whispers. "The war took Mama too. If there'd been no war, maybe medicine would have come faster. Maybe she'd still be alive." James squeezes her hand. "Maybe. We'll never know, but I do know this. Hate doesn't bring back the people we lost. It just makes us lose more." The first English lesson happens the next evening. Sarah sits at the kitchen table, textbooks spread out, her stomach tight with anxiety. Margaret enters quietly, her movements careful, her expression neutral. They sit across from each other. Two strangers, former enemies. A 15-year-old American girl and a 34-year-old German woman, both trying to navigate a world that's supposed to be at peace but doesn't feel peaceful at all. "Papa says I should teach you English," Sarah begins, her voice barely above a whisper. "For work," Margaret nods. "Thank you. English very hard for me, German easier. Silence stretches between them, uncomfortable, heavy. Then Sarah asks the question that's been burning in her mind since the POWs arrived. Did you work for Hitler? Margaret's face tightens. She shakes her head firmly. No, never. I work for family, grow potatoes, like your father. My family, not Nazi. We are farmers. War took everything from me. Sarah's guard drops slightly. Everything. Margaret's voice cracks. Mother, father, brother, grandmother, home, farm, everything gone. War destroy all. The silence now is different, softer, sadder. Sarah's eyes fill with tears. War took my mama too, 3 years ago. Tuberculosis. If there was no war, maybe medicine would come faster. Maybe she'd still be here. Margaret reaches across the table slowly, carefully, and touches Sarah's hand. Just a light touch, a connection across the chasm of nationality and language and loss. I am sorry, Margaret says softly. Losing mother is very hard. Very hard, I understand. In that moment, two hearts broken by the same war find an unexpected connection. Sarah sees that Margaret isn't a monster. She's just a woman who lost everything. And Margaret sees that Americans like Germans bleed the same red blood and cry the same tears. It's the beginning of a bond that will soon be tested beyond anything either can imagine. May 3rd, 1946, 5 weeks after Margaret arrived. During her lunch break, she walks past the potato fields. 240 acres of lush green plants swaying in the Iowa wind. To untrained eyes, the crop looks perfect. But Margaret's eyes aren't untrained. They've been trained by 7 generations of Bavarian potato farmers. And what she sees makes her blood run cold. She stops at the edge of the field. Her eyes scan the rows. Most people would see nothing wrong. But Margaret sees the small brown spots on leaves in row 17. Tiny, almost invisible. But she knows exactly what they mean. Phytophthora infestans, late blight. The memory hits her like a physical blow. Bavaria, 1938. She was 26 years old, working alongside her grandmother Anna Moe in their family fields. Late blight had swept through the region that year, the worst outbreak in 50 years. Neighboring farms panicked, followed the modern advice from Nazi agricultural advisors, and lost everything. But Anna Muller remembered the old ways, the traditional method passed down through generations. She called it the 3-part blessing: ash, lime, and sulfur, mixed in precise ratios, applied in a precise way, ancient knowledge that modern science had dismissed as folklore. Anna had used the method. While 15 neighboring farms lost 100% of their crops, the Muller family saved 82%. Margaret had been there, had helped mix the compounds, had watched the miracle happen. She knows this disease, knows how fast it spreads, knows that without treatment, 50% of the crop will be lost in 1 week, 100% in 2 weeks. But she's a prisoner, a German. What right does she have to speak up? The Americans have universities, they have science. They have experts with PhDs. Who is she to tell them what to do? But she hears her grandmother's voice in her memory. Margaret, if you know how to save crops and stay silent, you don't deserve the name Muller. Knowledge doesn't belong to you. It belongs to whoever needs it. For 3 days, Margaret watches in silence. The brown spots spread. 10 plants, 20, 40. She works her assigned tasks, cleaning, organizing, feeding livestock, but her mind stays on the fields. She calculates timelines. She sees the disaster approaching like a slow-motion train wreck. And she sees Sarah's face, sweet Sarah who's already lost so much. If this farm fails, Sarah will lose her home. James will lose everything his family built. Robert Crawford's 4 children will have no future. The knowledge her grandmother gave her could save them. But speaking up could get her sent away, marked as a troublemaker, deported to who knows where. On May 7th, James Hawthorne discovers the brown spots during his morning inspection. He knows immediately what it is. He's seen it before back in '38. Late blight, the potato farmer's nightmare. He calls Dennis Walsh, the county agricultural extension agent. Dennis is 42 years old, an Iowa State graduate, 18 years of experience in agricultural science. He arrives within 2 hours, takes samples from 12 different areas of the field, and promises to send them to the university immediately. 2 days later, the phone rings. James picks up in his kitchen, Robert Crawford standing beside him. They'd been expecting this call, dreading it. Dennis, this is Dr. Richard Thornton Trenton, head of plant pathology at Iowa State University. I've examined your samples. James's knuckles go white, gripping the phone. And I'm very sorry, Dennis. It's Phytophthora infestans, late blight, severe infestation. There's no cure. Copper sulfate spray might slow the progression, but it won't stop it. Your farmers are looking at total crop failure. The words hit James like bullets. Total crop failure. Is there anything at all we can try? Dennis asks. Dr. Thornton's voice is sympathetic but firm. I wish there was. But late blight at this stage is unstoppable. The spores have penetrated the vascular system. They're spreading from inside the plants. No external treatment can reach them. My advice is to accept the loss file insurance claims if you have coverage and start planning for next season. James hangs up the phone. His hands are shaking. Everything he's built, everything his father and grandfather built, gone. In 2 weeks, the bank will foreclose. Sarah will have nowhere to go. Robert Crawford's face has gone pale. 4 children, a wife who depends on him, $3,500 in debt. No way to pay it back without this harvest. The 2 men sit in silence in James's kitchen. Outside, the May sun shines bright and warm. Inside, their world is ending. 200 feet away in the barn, Margaret Muller has heard every word through the open window. She's been cleaning tack, but her hands have gone still. Her heart is pounding. The university has declared the crops dead. Modern science has given up. But she knows a way, an ancient way, a way that worked in Bavaria when everything else failed. She has to speak up, but if she does, she'll be stepping into a minefield. A German prisoner telling American farmers that their experts are wrong, claiming she knows better than university scientists. She could be labeled a troublemaker, a liar, even a saboteur, trying to destroy American agriculture with false hope. But if she stays silent, James will lose everything. Sarah will lose her home. Robert's children will have no future. Margaret sets down the bridle she's been cleaning. Her hands are shaking. She walks out of the barn into the late afternoon sunlight. James is standing by the horse paddock staring at nothing, his face blank with shock. Robert has already left to break the news to his wife. Margaret approaches slowly. Mr. Patterson, she says quietly, I am sorry. I hear about the crops. James doesn't turn around. His voice is hollow. Yeah. It's over. University says so. Marguerite takes a breath. This is the moment, the choice that will change everything. Mr. Patterson, she says, and her voice is stronger now, more certain. I can save them. James turns around slowly. He looks at her as if she's spoken in a language he doesn't understand. What's your potato crops? I can save them. I know how to stop the blight. James stares at her. You just heard what I heard. Iowa State University. Dr. Thornton, they said there's no cure. Margaret meets his eyes. They say no modern cure. I not talk about modern. I talk about old way. From my grandmother, from her grandmother, from many generations in Bavaria. James's expression shifts from shock to something else. Hope, suspicion. He can't tell. You're telling me that your grandmother in Germany knows something that Iowa State University doesn't. Margaret nods firmly. Not no more. No different. 1938. Late blight hit Bavaria. Worst in 50 years. Every farm in my town lost all crops. Every farm. Except my family. Why? Because my grandmother used the old method. The 3-part blessing. Ash, lime, sulfur in exact ratio. Mix with sour milk. Spray on every leaf, every plant. After 3 days, blight stops spreading. After 7 days, plants begin to recover. James wants to believe her. God, how he wants to believe. But university scientists with PhDs have just told him it's impossible. The university says there's no way. Margaret's voice is gentle but firm. Mr. Patterson, I lose everything in war. Family, home, country. And all I have left is a knowledge my grandmother teach me. I not lie about it. It is all I have. The sincerity in her voice, the certainty in her eyes cuts through James's despair. He looks at this German woman, this prisoner, who has nothing, who owes him nothing, who's offering him hope, when his own country's experts have given him a death sentence. Robert Crawford appears from around the barn. He's been listening. "Jim," he says quietly, "she's right about one thing. We're dead anyway, according to the university." What's worse than dead, James looks at the dying fields, at his farmhouse where Sarah's growing up without her mother, at the legacy 3 generations built. Then he looks back at Margaret. "Show me," he says. "Show me this method of yours. In the next part of our story, you'll witness something that should be impossible. A 200-year-old grandmother's recipe going head-to-head with Ivy League science. A German prisoner risking everything to save American farms. And a showdown that will prove once and for all that sometimes the most powerful knowledge doesn't come from universities. It comes from people who never forgot the old ways. And in 48 hours, everyone in Webster County will know whether Margaret Muller is a genius or a fraud." That evening, May 10th, 1946, the sun hangs low over Webster County, painting the barn in shades of amber and gold. Inside, 3 people stand around a wooden workbench. James Hawthorne and Robert Crawford watch as Margaret Muller prepares to demonstrate something that will either save their farms or prove she's delusional. On the bench sits a collection of ordinary materials: a bucket of wood ash from James's fireplace, pale gray and fine as powder; a bag of hydrated lime from the agricultural supply store; a jar of sulfur powder, bright yellow, with that distinctive sharp smell; several glass jars, measuring cups, and a jug of fresh milk that's been sitting out since morning, just beginning to turn. "This is the 3-part blessing," Margaret says. Her English is slow, careful, but her voice carries absolute certainty. "My grandmother called it this because it blessed the plants, the soil, the farmer. 3 parts, ash, lime, sulfur." Robert shifts his weight, skeptical. "The university just told us sulfur spray might slow the blight, but won't stop it. How is this different?" Margaret meets his eyes. "University used sulfur alone. This used sulfur with ash and lime. Together they do what alone they cannot. My grandmother not know chemistry words, but she know it works." She begins measuring with meticulous precision. Her hands are steady now, confident. This is knowledge she's carried across an ocean through war and loss and imprisonment. This is what her grandmother died protecting. "Ratio must be exact," she says. 3 parts ash, 2 parts lime, 1 part sulfur, 3-2-1. You remember. 3-2-1. James watches her measure out the ash first. 3 cups of fine gray powder that once was oak wood burning in his fireplace. The ash contains potassium, calcium, phosphorus, minerals that strengthen plant defenses. But Margaret doesn't know those scientific terms. She just knows it works. Next, 2 cups of hydrated lime, white powder that will raise the pH on leaf surface, creating an environment hostile to fungal growth. But again, Margaret doesn't speak of pH levels. She speaks of tradition. Finally, 1 cup of sulfur powder, the direct antifungal agent that will kill spores on contact. But sulfur alone isn't enough. It's the combination that creates something greater than the sum of its parts. "Why exactly that ratio?" James asks. Margaret pours the 3 powders into a large glass jar. Too much sulfur burn plants. Too much lime change soil too fast. Too much ash make treatment weak. This ratio perfect. Test over 200 years, maybe more. She mixes the powders carefully, creating a pale gray-green compound. The smell is earthy, slightly sharp from the sulfur, but not unpleasant. When mixed thoroughly, she holds up the jar. This is dry part. But now comes important part. The milk. Robert actually laughs, a short, bitter sound. "You want us to pour milk on our crops?" Margaret doesn't smile. "Not fresh milk. Sour milk. Begin to turn, not rotten. 12 hours after milking. Like this." She opens the jug. The milk smells slightly tangy, the lactose beginning to ferment. James wrinkles his nose but says nothing. Margaret explains as she works. Sour milk do 3 things. 1, make mixture, stick to leaves. 2, help soak into leaf surface. 3, bacteria in sour milk make barrier. My grandmother not know word bacteria, but she know it helps. She demonstrates the final mixture. 1 cup of the ash lime sulfur powder, 1 gallon of water, 1 cup of sour milk. She stirs it in a bucket, and the combination creates a cloudy grayish liquid that smells of earth and dairy and sulfur. "This spray on every leaf," Margaret says. top and bottom. Every stem, every plant must cover completely. James looks at his fields. 240 acres. Thousands of plants. How do we possibly cover that much? Margaret's expression is calm. You have 12 prisoners, each person one spray bottle, dawn to sunset. If everyone work one day, maybe two. One day to spray 240 acres. Robert sounds incredulous. Margaret nods. In Bavaria, we spray 45 hectare in one day with 8 people. More hectare than your acre. This possible, but must work fast. Blight spread every day. James runs the calculations in his head. It's insane. It's based on folk wisdom from a German grandmother who probably couldn't read. It contradicts everything the university just told him. But what's the alternative? Watch his crops die, lose everything, and how do we know it'll work? Robert asks the question both men are thinking. Margaret looks him straight in the eye. 3 days you see blight stop spreading. 7 days you see plants begin recover. 14 days you know crops saved. 3 days to see if the spreading stops. That's the first test. If the brown spots don't spread beyond where they are now, that's proof the treatment is working. 7 days to see new growth. 14 days to know for certain. Robert turns to James. What does Dennis Walsh think about this? We haven't told him, James admits. You're planning to cover 400 acres with a mixture of ash lime sulfur and sour milk without telling the county agricultural agent. James's jaw sets. Dennis will tell us not to waste our time. He'll say we're being foolish, ignoring science, chasing false hope. But Dennis isn't standing here looking at bankruptcy. We are. The barn falls silent except for the sound of evening birds outside. The decision hangs in the air like smoke. Finally, James speaks. We'll try it, starting tomorrow morning. Margaret, can you teach the other prisoners how to mix this and apply it? She nods. I teach tonight. Everyone know by morning. Then we spray at dawn. But there's someone else who needs to know about this plan. Someone who has strong opinions about Germans working on American soil. Someone who lost his only son to the war and sees any cooperation with former enemies as betrayal. Harold Brennan hears about the plan 2 days later. He's in the feed store when conversation stops as he enters. That's how he knows something's up. In a small town, silence is louder than gossip. What he demands. The store owner, Tom Hendricks, hesitates. Harold, you should probably ask Jim Hawthorne about this directly. Ask him about what Tom sighs. Word is Jim and Robert are letting that German woman treat their blight. Some kind of folk remedy, ash and milk or something. Harold's face goes red. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. The university said the crops are done. Now they're trusting a German prisoner over Iowa State. Tom shrugs. Desperate men do desperate things, Harold. You know that. Harold storms out of the feed store and drives straight to James's farm. He arrives just as the evening spraying is finishing. 20 German prisoners are cleaning the spray bottles, their uniforms stained with gray residue. Margaret is supervising, checking that equipment is properly cleaned for tomorrow. James sees Harold's truck and knows this conversation won't be pleasant. He walks out to meet him before Harold can reach the prisoners. Harold, James says evenly. What brings you by? Harold's voice shakes with anger. Is it true? Are you really letting these Germans spray some kind of witch's brew on your crops? It's a traditional agricultural treatment from Bavaria. And yes, we're using it. Jim, the university said your crops are finished. And instead of accepting that with dignity, you're chasing snake oil sold by the enemy. James's own temper flares. The enemy, Harold. The war's over, and that woman has more practical knowledge about fighting potato blight than any professor at Iowa State. She's a German, Jim. My son died fighting Germans. And you're taking farming advice from one. Your son died fighting the Japanese, Harold. At Iwo Jima, not in Europe. The distinction hits Harold like a slap. His son Kevin had been a Marine in the Pacific. Never saw Europe. Never fought Germans directly. But in Harold's mind, all enemies blended together. And all wore the same face of the regime that had gassed him at Verdun in 1918. Doesn't matter, Harold says, but his voice has lost some of its force. They're all the same. And if this fails, if this makes you look like a fool, don't come crying to the Farmers Association for sympathy. I'm not looking for sympathy, Harold. I'm looking for a way to save my farm. And if that makes me a fool, so be it. Harold drives away in a cloud of dust, but the confrontation leaves James shaken. Because Harold isn't entirely wrong. If this treatment fails, James will be a laughingstock. The farmer who trusted a German grandmother over university science. The desperate fool who believed in folk magic. But if it works, if it actually works, everything changes. That night, Sarah finds her father sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that's gone cold. "Papa, you okay?" James looks up at his daughter, sweet Sarah, who's already had to grow up too fast, who lost her mother and might lose her home. "Just thinking, sweetheart, about the treatment, yeah." Sarah sits down across from him. She's been watching Margaret work all day, watching the meticulous care with which the German woman measures and mixes and teaches, watching the determination in those blue eyes. "I think she really believes it'll work," Sarah says quietly. "Believing and knowing are different things." "Maybe. But Papa, I've been teaching her English for 5 weeks now, and I've learned something about her." "What's that?" "She doesn't lie about anything, even when lying would make things easier. Last week I asked if she liked the stew I made. It was terrible, I know it was. And she said very gently that it needed more salt and maybe less pepper. She could have lied to make me feel good. But she didn't." James considers this. "You trust her?" Sarah nods slowly. "I think I do. And I think if Grandmother Anna's method worked in Bavaria, Margaret wouldn't claim it if she wasn't certain. That's a lot of trust to put in a prisoner of war." Sarah's eyes meet her father's. "Mama used to say that character isn't about where you're born or who your enemies are. It's about what you do when no one's forcing you. Margaret doesn't have to help us. She could stay quiet and let us fail. But she's risking herself to save strangers. That's character, isn't it?" James reaches across the table and takes his daughter's hand. "When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher." The next morning, May 11th, begins with the massive spraying operation. 20 German prisoners, each with a hand-pump spray bottle, move through the fields in systematic rows. Margaret has taught them exactly how to spray. Every leaf top and bottom, every stem. Complete coverage. The mixture goes on wet and gray. It dries to a pale whitish coating that looks almost like frost. The smell is distinctive, earthy, and slightly sour, but not overwhelming. As the sun climbs higher, the fields take on a ghostly appearance, every plant coated in the protective compound. James and Robert work alongside the prisoners, spraying their own rows. It's back-breaking labor. The hand pumps are heavy. The repetitive motion of pump spray, move, wears on shoulders and backs. But they keep going. By sunset, all 400 acres are covered. Every plant, every leaf. The prisoners are exhausted, their uniforms soaked with sweat and stained with the gray mixture. But there's something else in their faces too. Pride, maybe. The satisfaction of hard work completed. Margaret inspects the work carefully. She walks through the fields as the last light fades, checking coverage, making sure no plants were missed. Finally, she nods. "Good," she tells James. "Now we wait." 3 days, right? 3 days to see if the blight stops spreading. Yes. By May 14th, we know if treatment work. Those 3 days are the longest of James Hawthorne's life. Every morning he wakes before dawn and walks the fields examining plants, looking for new brown spots. Every evening, he does the same. Robert Crawford mirrors his routine, the two men like sentries watching for an enemy that attacks from within. On May 12th, James kneels beside a plant that had shown advanced blight symptoms on May 9th. 3 days ago, the leaves were 30% brown. The stems showed dark lesions. The plant was clearly dying. Now James looks closer. The brown areas haven't spread. He examines leaf after leaf, plant after plant. Old damage is still there, frozen in place. But there are no new brown spots, no new lesions. The spreading has stopped. His hands start shaking. He walks to the next plant. Same thing. Old damage, no new spread. Next plant. Same. He breaks into a run, moving through the rows, checking plant after plant after plant. The blight has stopped spreading. Completely. Every plant in the field shows the same pattern. Old wounds frozen in time. No new infection. Robert appears at the field's edge, running. Jim. My fields, the blight stopped. It stopped spreading. The two farmers stand in the middle of 400 acres of potato plants that should be dead, but aren't. The university said total crop failure. Modern science said give up. But a Bavarian grandmother's 200-year-old recipe has done what Ivy League experts said was impossible. James falls to his knees. He's not a man who cries easily, hasn't cried since Mary died. But tears stream down his face now. Relief, gratitude, wonder. Robert's crying too unashamed. 4 children who won't lose their home. A wife who won't see her husband broken. A future that seemed lost and now impossibly is opening up again. They find Margaret in the barn cleaning equipment. When she sees their faces, she knows. It worked, James says, his voice choked. The blight stopped. Just like you said. Margaret's expression softens. Not surprise exactly, more like quiet satisfaction. Yes, the blessing worked. It always worked. How did you know? How were you so certain? Because I see it before. In Bavaria. Many times, when everyone else panicked, my grandmother stayed calm. She know the old way, and the old way never fail. But there's something else James needs to know. Why? Why did you risk telling us you're a prisoner? You could have stayed quiet, watched us fail. No one would have blamed you. Margaret is quiet for a moment. Then she speaks and her voice carries the weight of everything she's lost. Mr. Patterson would take everything from me. Family, home, country. But it not take one thing. It not take what my grandmother teach me. Knowledge is not for keeping, is for sharing, especially when people need. She pauses and her eyes meet his. Also, she continues, Sarah is good girl. Remind me of me at her age. War already take her mother. It should not take her home too. If I can stop that, I must try. The simplicity of it. The fundamental decency, James Hawthorne. 3rd-generation Iowa farmer stands in his barn with a German prisoner of war and realizes that everything he thought he knew about enemies and allies, about us and them, has just been challenged. But the story isn't over. In fact, the real test is just beginning. Because stopping the blight from spreading is one thing. Getting the plants to actually recover is another. And there's still a man in this county who sees this whole situation as an affront to his son's memory. News spreads through Webster County faster than the blight ever could. By May 13th, everyone knows that James Hawthorne and Robert Crawford used some kind of German folk remedy on their crops. And that somehow impossibly the blight stopped spreading. Dennis Walsh, the county agricultural agent, hears about it in his office. He immediately calls Iowa State University. Dr. Thornton, this is Dennis Walsh in Webster County. I have a situation I need to discuss with you. What kind of situation? You remember those farmers with the late blight outbreak, Patterson and Crawford? They didn't follow your advice to accept the crop loss. What did they do? They used a treatment suggested by a German POW, some kind of traditional Bavarian method. And Dennis pauses, still not quite believing it himself. The blight appears to have stopped spreading. Silence on the other end of the line. Then Dr. Thornton's voice carefully controlled. Describe this treatment. Dennis explains what he's learned. Ash lime sulfur in a 3-to-1 ratio, mixed with sour milk, sprayed on every leaf and stem. Complete coverage. More silence. Doctor. Thornton is thinking, running through his knowledge of plant pathology, trying to understand how this could possibly work. I'll need to see this myself, he says finally. I can be there in 2 days, May 15th. The fields will still be here, Dennis assures him. But Dennis has another concern. He drives out to James's farm that afternoon. He finds James and Margaret discussing the next steps. The treatment has stopped the spreading, but will the plants recover? That's the question for the next 4 days. Jim Dennis says without preamble, Dr. Thornton is coming to inspect your fields on May 15th. James nods slowly. Okay, he's the head of plant pathology at Iowa State. When I told him what you'd done, he didn't believe me. He needs to see it himself. Margaret speaks up quietly. What if he say we wrong? Say treatment, not real, then we show him the evidence, James replies. 400 acres of plants that should be dead, but are stabilizing. That's hard to argue with. But Dennis isn't finished. There's something else, Jim. Harold Brennan called a special meeting of the Farmers Association for tomorrow night. He's going to demand an investigation. He thinks this whole thing is dangerous. He's talking about reporting it to the military as potential sabotage. James's jaw tightens. Sabotage? We're trying to save crops, not destroy them. Harold sees it differently. He sees a German prisoner influencing American agricultural decisions. He sees farmers ignoring university science in favor of folk magic. He's frightened Jim, and frightened people do stupid things. The meeting is scheduled for May 14th at 7 in the evening. Grange Hall again. But this time the energy is different. The room is packed. Farmers from all over the county have come to hear what Harold has to say. And what Harold has to say is damning. He stands at the front of the room, his face flushed, his breathing labored from his damaged lungs. Gentlemen, we have a situation that threatens the integrity of American agriculture. Two of our members have chosen to ignore scientific advice from Iowa State University. Instead, they followed the recommendations of a German prisoner of war using an untested folk remedy that could be anything. James is on his feet immediately. The remedy is working, Harold. The blight has stopped spreading. You don't know that it's the treatment that stopped it. Could be weather. Could be natural disease progression. Could be anything. Then why did it stop exactly 3 days after we applied the treatment, just like Margaret said it would? Harold's voice rises. Because she got lucky, or because she knows more about plant diseases than she's letting on? Think about it, Jim. She appears just weeks before your crops get sick. She claims to have a cure. How do we know she didn't cause the blight in the first place? The accusation hangs in the air like poison gas. The room goes dead silent. James's voice is ice. You're accusing her of biological sabotage. I'm saying we should investigate all possibilities. That woman was our enemy 6 months ago. Now she's influencing major agricultural decisions on American soil. The military should know about this. Robert Crawford stands up. Harold, with all due respect, you're letting your grief cloud your judgment. Margaret Muller didn't cause late blight. It's a natural disease that's been killing potato crops for centuries. She just happens to know an old method for fighting it. An old method Harold sneers that somehow works better than modern university science. You expect me to believe that? Then Dennis Walsh speaks up from the back of the room. Actually, Harold, Dr. Thornton from Iowa State is coming tomorrow to examine the fields himself. Maybe we should wait for his assessment before making accusations of sabotage. Harold looks around the room. He sees doubt in some faces, curiosity in others, support in a few. But he also sees that he's losing this fight. The farmers want to see if the treatment actually works. They want to know if this Bavarian method is real. Fine, Harold says finally. We'll wait for the university expert. But I'm telling you all now, if this turns out to be a fraud, if those crops die anyway, I'm reporting this to every authority I can find. We don't let enemy prisoners experiment on American farms. He sits down heavily, his face gray from exertion and anger. The meeting disperses without resolution. But battle lines have been drawn. That night, Sarah can't sleep. She lies in bed thinking about Margaret, about the quiet dignity with which she works, about the pain behind her eyes when she speaks of her lost family, about the certainty in her voice when she explains the three-part blessing. Sarah gets up and finds Margaret in the barn. The German woman is sitting on a hay bale staring at nothing. She looks up when Sarah enters. Could not sleep, Margaret asks. Sarah shakes her head. I heard about the meeting, about what Mr. Brennan said. Margaret's face is calm. He is angry. Grief makes people angry. I understand. But he's wrong about you. You didn't cause the blight. You're trying to help, I know. But he needs someone to blame. I am German. Easy to blame. They sit in silence for a moment. Then Sarah asks the question that's been bothering her. Margaret, what if Dr. Thornton says it doesn't work? What if he says the treatment failed? Margaret looks at her steadily. Treatment not fail. In 3 more days you see new growth. Plants recover. Dr. Thornton see truth. But what if he doesn't believe his own eyes? Then he is not good scientist. Good scientists believe evidence, not just theory. Sarah manages a small smile. You sound very sure. I am sure, because my grandmother teach me not just recipe. She teach me to trust what I see more than what people say. I see blight stop. I see plants stabilize. In 3 days I see recovery. That is truth. University can accept truth or not. Truth does not change. It's simple logic, unshakable. And in that moment, Sarah understands something fundamental about Margaret Muller. This woman has already lost everything. She has nothing left to lose except her integrity, and that she will never surrender. Tomorrow, Dr. Richard Thornton arrives. The man who declared these crops dead will have to confront living evidence that contradicts everything he knows. And in a small Iowa town, the collision between modern science and ancient wisdom is about to reach its breaking point. The question isn't whether the treatment works. The evidence of that is growing in the fields every day. The question is whether a man with a PhD from an Ivy League university will have the humility to admit that a Bavarian grandmother knew something he didn't, and whether a community torn by war and grief can find a way to come together when the truth challenges everything they thought they knew. In the next part of our story, you'll witness that confrontation. You'll see the moment when academic arrogance meets undeniable reality. And you'll discover what happens when a German prisoner's courage forces an entire county to question the difference between knowledge and wisdom. May 15th, 1946, 9 o'clock in the morning. A black sedan pulls up the long gravel drive to the Patterson farm, dust rising behind it like smoke. Dr. Richard Thornton has arrived. He steps out of the car carrying a leather case filled with testing equipment. He's 60 years old, tall and lean, with steel gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that catch the Iowa sun. For 35 years, he's been studying plant diseases. He's written 4 textbooks, trained hundreds of students. His expertise is beyond question. But right now, his expertise is being challenged by a German prisoner of war with no formal education, and that makes him deeply uncomfortable. Dennis Walsh meets him at the car. "Richard, thank you for coming. I know it's a long drive from Ames." Dr. Thornton's handshake is firm, professional. "Dennis, when you told me about this situation, I had to see it for myself." "Where are the fields?" James Hawthorne approaches from the barn. He's wearing clean work clothes, his best effort at respectability for this inspection. "Dr. Thornton, I'm James Hawthorne. These are my fields. Robert Crawford's adjoined mine to the west. Same crop, same treatment." Dr. Thornton nods curtly. "I understand you've applied an unconventional treatment against my explicit recommendation that the crops were beyond saving." James feels the criticism in those words but keeps his voice level. "We applied a traditional Bavarian method for fighting late blight, and it appears to be working." "Appears," Dr. Thornton repeats. "That's what we're here to determine, not appearances, Mr. Hawthorne. Facts, scientific facts." The 3 men walk out to the fields. The morning sun illuminates 240 acres of potato plants, each one still bearing the pale residue of the treatment. Dr. Thornton stops at the field's edge and scans the rows with a practiced eye. "Show me the plants with the most advanced infection," he says. James leads him to row 17, where the first symptoms appeared back on May 3rd. He kneels beside a plant that had been severely infected when the university samples were taken on May 9th. This plant was about 30% brown 6 days ago, James explains. Leaves curling stem, showing dark lesions. It was dying. Dr. Thornton kneels beside him, sets down his case, and examines the plant with meticulous care. He turns leaves over, studying both surfaces. He inspects the stem. He takes out a magnifying glass and examines the tissue closely. The brown lesions are still present, he observes. The damage hasn't healed. No, Sir James agrees, but it hasn't spread either. Look at the margins of the brown areas. They're crisp, defined, not the fuzzy edges you see with active infection. Dr. Thornton moves to the next plant, then the next. He works in silence for 20 minutes, examining plant after plant in the infected zone. His face reveals nothing, but his movements become more deliberate, more careful. He's seeing something that doesn't fit his understanding. Finally, he straightens up. "The lesion progression has stopped. I'll grant you that, but that doesn't necessarily mean your treatment caused it. Environmental factors can slow blight spread. Temperature changes, humidity levels. This could be natural fluctuation." James had expected this argument. Then why has the same pattern appeared in Robert Crawford's fields 3 miles west? Different microclimate, same result. And why did it stop exactly 72 hours after we applied the treatment, which is exactly what the method predicted? Dr. Thornton doesn't answer. Instead, he says, "I'd like to take tissue samples for laboratory analysis." "Of course, and I'd like to speak with the person who recommended this treatment." "That would be Margaret Mahler." "She's in the barn," the German prisoner, Dr. Thornton says. "Yes, I'd very much like to hear her explanation." They find Margaret cleaning equipment, preparing for the day's work. She looks up as the 3 men enter, and her eyes immediately assess Dr. Thornton. She recognizes authority when she sees it. This is the man from the university, the expert who declared the crops dead, Fräulein Müller. Dr. Thornton says in careful German, "I'm Dr. Richard Thornton from Iowa State University. I'd like to discuss your treatment method." Margaret straightens, wipes her hands on her apron. She responds in German, and Dennis translates for James. "I am happy to explain, doctor. What would you like to know?" Dr. Thornton switches to English, speaking slowly and clearly so Margaret can follow. "Describe your treatment. All components, exact proportions, application method." Margaret takes a breath and begins. Her English is still halting, but her technical precision is flawless. 3 parts wood ash, 2 parts hydrated lime, 1 part sulfur powder. Mix then add 1 cup of mixture to 1 gallon water and 1 cup sour milk. Sour 12 hours, not fresh, not rotten. Why those specific ratios, Dr. Thornton asks? Margareta's answer is simple. My grandmother say too much sulfur burn plants. Too much lime change soil bad. Too much ash make weak. This ratio perfect. Test many years. Tested how in controlled conditions with scientific methodology. Test in fields, Margaret says. In Bavaria, many times, when blight come, farmers who use this method save crops. Farmers who not use lose everything. That is test. Dr. Thornton removes his glasses and cleans them slowly. That's empirical observation, not controlled experimentation. You can't draw scientific conclusions from anecdotal evidence. But I can draw conclusions from what I see, Margaret replies, and there's steel in her voice now. I see your science say crops die. I see grandmother method say crops live. Now I see plants not dying. Which conclusion is right? The challenge hangs in the air. Dr. Thornton puts his glasses back on. His jaw is tight. You don't understand the complexity of plant pathology. Phytophthora infestans reproduces through sporangia that penetrate plant tissue through stomata and wounds. Once the mycelial network is established systemically, no external treatment can reach it. Margaret listens carefully, working through the English. Then she says, "You use big words. My grandmother used small words. But her small words save crops when your big words say impossible." Dr. Thornton's face flushes. Modern agricultural science is built on rigorous research, peer-reviewed studies, controlled trials. Not folk remedies passed down by illiterate farmers. My grandmother not illiterate, Margaret says quietly. She read Bible every day. She read almanac. She read everything she could. She just not read in university. But she read in fields. She read in plants. She read what work and what not work. That is reading too. The barn falls silent. James watches Dr. Thornton struggle with something fundamental. Here is a man who has built his entire career on academic credentials, peer-reviewed publications, the structures of institutional authority. And here is a woman with none of those things telling him he's wrong based on nothing more than lived experience and generational knowledge. Dr. Thornton turns to Dennis. I need to examine the fields more thoroughly. I'll take samples back to the lab. We'll analyze the tissue culture, the pathogen test, the treatment components in controlled conditions. Then we'll have real answers. How long will that take? James asks. 2 weeks minimum for comprehensive analysis. Dr. James says carefully in 2 weeks we'll already know if the plants recover. May 19th will be 7 days from treatment. That's when Margaret says we'll see new growth. If she's right about that, like she was right about the 3-day timeline, won't that tell you something? It'll tell me correlation, not causation, Dr. Thornton replies. But fine, I'll return on May 19th to observe whatever growth patterns emerge. But I'm telling you now, Mr. Hawthorne, don't get your hopes up. Stopping disease progression is one thing. Actual plant recovery from this level of infection is medically impossible. Medically impossible, Margaret repeats, testing the words. But plants not medicine. Plants are life. Life want to live. We just help it. Dr. Thornton snaps his case closed. I'll be back in 4 days. We'll see what's medically possible then. He drives away in his black sedan, leaving a cloud of dust and unresolved tension. Dennis Walsh stays behind, sitting with James on the porch as the sun climbs higher. He's rattled, Dennis observes. I've never seen Richard Thornton rattled. Good, James says. Maybe being rattled will open his mind or make him dig in deeper. Some men can't admit they're wrong. Their whole identity is built on being the expert. If a German grandmother proves him wrong, what does that say about his 35 years of expertise? It says expertise without humility is just arrogance. Dennis looks out at the fields. You really think we'll see new growth in 4 days? I think Margaret has been right about everything so far. The 3-day timeline for stopping the spread, the exact way the lesions would stabilize. She called it all perfectly. But new growth, Jim, from plants this damaged, that's asking for a miracle. James smiles slightly. Maybe, but I've learned something these past 2 weeks. Sometimes the difference between miracle and science is just time and patience. Ask me again on May 19th. The next 4 days pass in excruciating slowness. James checks the fields 3 times a day. Every morning at dawn, midday during lunch, evening before sunset. He's looking for the first signs of new growth, the tiny green shoots that will prove Margaret right and Dr. Thornton wrong. Sarah has been watching her father pace and worry. On the evening of May 17th, she finds Margaret in the barn and asks the question that's been on everyone's mind. Are you worried about what Dr. Thornton will say if the plants don't recover? Margaret is mending a harness, her hands steady on the leather. I'm not worried. Plants will recover. I see it before. But what if something's different here? Different soil, different climate, different variety of potato. Margaret sets down the harness. Sarah, you know how I teach you English. Yes, teach you rules, grammar. But sometimes English not follow rules, yes. Sometimes words strange, but you still learn, you adapt. Nature same way. My grandmother method work in Bavaria. It work here too. Plants want live, we give them chance, they take it. Sarah sits down on a hay bale. Mr. Brennan came by today. He told Papa that if the plants don't recover, he's going to report you to the military. He says you're a security risk. Margaret nods slowly. Mr. Brennan very angry. His son die in war. He need blame someone. I understand. But you didn't do anything wrong. You're trying to help. In his eyes, I am German. That is wrong enough. It's not fair. Margaret looks at Sarah with ancient sadness in her eyes. War not fair, loss not fair, grief not fair. But we not control what fair. We only control what we do. I do what is right. Save crops. Help family. That is all I can do. Sarah feels tears building. What if they send you away? After all this, then I go. But knowledge stay. You know the method now. Your father know. Robert know. Even if I leave, the 3-part blessing stay in Iowa. That is enough. It's not enough for Sarah. In the past 6 weeks, Margaret has become more than just an English student. She's become something like a friend. Maybe something like the mother figure Sarah lost 3 years ago. Someone who listens without judgment, who teaches without condescension, who treats her like an adult capable of understanding difficult truths. I don't want you to go, Sarah says quietly. Margaret reaches over and squeezes her hand. I not want go either. But we see. May 19th comes soon. Then we know. May 19th arrives with a perfect spring morning. Clear sawa, warm sun, gentle breeze, carrying the smell of growing things. James is in the fields before dawn, walking the rows with a kerosene lantern, too anxious to wait for sunrise. And that's when he sees it. New growth. Tiny green shoots emerging from the stems of plants that had been nearly dead 7 days ago. Fresh leaves, small and tender, growing from healthy tissue above the old lesions. The plants are regenerating. James kneels in the dirt, his hands shaking as he touches a new leaf. It's real. It's happening exactly as Margaret said it would. Day 7, new growth appears. The plants aren't just surviving, they're recovering. He runs to Robert Crawford's farm, pounding on the door while the sun is still just a promise on the horizon. Robert answers in his nightshirt, alarmed. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Come look at your fields. They run together through the rows as dawn breaks, and Robert sees it too. New growth everywhere. Plants that should be corpses are sprouting fresh green life. Robert falls to his knees and starts laughing. It's the laughter of relief so profound it sounds almost like crying. 4 children who will keep their home. A wife who won't see her husband broken. A future that's opening up like these new leaves reaching for the sun. By 8 o'clock, when Dr. Thornton's black sedan pulls up the drive, James and Robert are waiting with barely contained triumph. Dennis Walsh is already there, having arrived an hour earlier to verify what James told him on the phone. The county agricultural agent keeps shaking his head in disbelief, but the evidence is undeniable. Dr. Thornton gets out of his car with his leather case and his professional skepticism. Good morning, gentlemen. Shall we examine these fields? They walk out together and Dr. Thornton immediately sees what they're showing him. New growth, not just on a few plants, on hundreds of plants, on thousands of plants across 400 acres. He kneels beside a plant that shows both old lesions and new growth. His hands work methodically examining tissue measuring shoots, checking leaf structure. He moves to another plant, another. His silence stretches out for 30 minutes while he inspects the evidence. Finally, he stands up. His face is ashen. This shouldn't be possible, he says quietly. But it is, James replies. The level of systemic infection these plants showed 6 days ago should have been irreversible. The pathogen had penetrated the vascular system. Recovery from that stage has never been documented in the literature. Well, Robert says maybe it's time to update the literature. Dr. Thornton removes his glasses and pinches the bridge of his nose. He looks exhausted, defeated, but also underneath that's something else. Curiosity, maybe. Wonder. I need to understand how this works, he says. The mechanism, the biochemistry. What is it about this combination of ash lime and sulfur that can halt systemic late blight infection and trigger plant recovery? Maybe you should ask Margaret. Dennis suggests. Dr. Thornton looks at him sharply. She can't explain the science. She doesn't have the background. No, James says, but she has something you don't. She has 7 generations of empirical observation. She has results. And right now, doctor, I'd say results matter more than theory. Dr. Thornton is quiet for a long moment. Then he says something that costs him dearly. You're right, I was wrong. Not just wrong about the prognosis for your crops. Wrong about the value of traditional agricultural knowledge. Wrong to dismiss this treatment without examination simply because it didn't come from an academic source. He looks at James directly. I apologize, Mr. Hawthorne, and I'd like permission to study this method properly, to understand it, to document it, to share it with other farmers who face late blight. The university wants to study Margaret's grandmother's method if she'll permit it, yes. This could change how we approach potato blight management worldwide. They find Margaret in the barn with Sarah. The two of them are working on English vocabulary, Sarah correcting Margaret's pronunciation of difficult words. They look up as the men enter. Dr. Thornton approaches Margaret directly. This time there's no condescension in his voice, only respect. Fräulein Müller, he says in German, I owe you an apology. I dismissed your knowledge as folklore. I was wrong. Your grandmother's method works. It works in ways that contradict current understanding of plant pathology, and I would very much like to study it with your permission. Margaret looks at him steadily. You want study to understand or to prove wrong to understand and to help other farmers. Late blight destroys potato crops all over the world. If your method can save even a fraction of those crops, it could prevent famine, save farms, protect families. That's worth studying. Margaret considers this. Then she nods. Yes, you can study, but you must share what you learn. Make it free for farmers, not just for university, for everyone who need, agreed Dr. Thornton says. Open publication, agricultural extension services. We'll make sure any farmer who faces late blight has access to this method. And you must say where it come from. Not from university, from my grandmother Anna Müller of Oberammergau, Bavaria. She not have degree, but she have wisdom. People must know wisdom matter. Dr. Thornton extends his hand. They shake. A formal peace between academic science and generational knowledge. But not everyone in Webster County is ready to make peace. That evening, Harold Brennan sits in his farmhouse office staring at his son's photograph. He's heard the news. The German woman's treatment worked. The crops are recovering. James Hawthorne and Robert Crawford will make their payments. Their farms are saved. And Harold doesn't know how to feel about that. Part of him is glad. These are his neighbors, good men. He doesn't actually want them to suffer. But another part of him, the part that's been consumed by grief for 15 months, sees this as a kind of betrayal. The Germans took his son. Now a German has proven herself valuable to the community, has become a hero even. Where does that leave his anger? His grief, if he can't hate all Germans anymore? What does he do with the rage that's been sustaining him? There's a knock at his door. When Harold opens it, he finds James Hawthorne standing there in the evening light. Harold, James says, "Can we talk?" Harold wants to slam the door. But he doesn't. He steps aside and lets James in. They sit in the office, Kevin's photograph between them like a third presence. I know you're angry, James begins. That doesn't even begin to cover it, Harold replies. I know. And you have every right to be. Kevin shouldn't have died. No 23-year-old should die on a beach thousands of miles from home. Harold's jaw tightens. Then why are you here to rub it in that the German woman was right? No. I'm here because I wanted you to know something. Margareta lost her brother too. Klaus, 28 years old, died at Stalingrad, froze to death in the Russian winter. Harold looks up sharply. She lost her father, James continues. Her grandmother, her mother, her entire family, her home, everything. The war destroyed her life just like it destroyed yours. That's not the same, Harold says, but his voice lacks conviction. No, it's not the same. Kevin was fighting for freedom. Klaus was fighting for a regime that was evil. But they're both dead, Harold. Two young men who should have lived long lives. And their families both have to carry that weight. What's your point? My point is that Margaret could have stayed silent, could have let my crops die, could have watched this community suffer and felt justified because we were the enemy. But she didn't. She helped. Because she doesn't see enemies anymore. She just sees people who need help. Harold stands up and walks to the window. When he speaks, his voice is rough with suppressed emotion. I can't just forget Jim. Every time I see her, I see the uniform that took Kevin from me. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to see her. Really see her. Not as a symbol of Germany or the war, as a person who suffered just like you have. Maybe more. Harold turns around. His eyes are wet. What am I supposed to do with all this anger? I don't know. But maybe you could start by acknowledging that she saved 2 farms, 16 jobs, and 4 kids from losing their home. Maybe you could start there. Harold sits back down heavily. They sit in silence for several minutes. Finally, Harold speaks. Tell her, he says quietly, tell her I said thank you. For the crops. For helping my neighbors. Just tell her that. Tell her yourself, James suggests gently. I can't, not yet. But someday, maybe. James stands to leave. At the door, he turns back. Harold, Kevin died fighting for freedom. The freedom to be better than our enemies. To choose kindness over hate. Honor that. Honor him by being the man he believed his father was. After James leaves, Harold sits alone with his son's photograph. He thinks about the last letter Kevin sent 2 weeks before Iwo Jima. In it, Kevin had written, Dad, I'm fighting so that my kids can grow up in a world where people don't have to hate each other just because of where they were born. Make sure that world happens, okay? Harold sets down the photograph and puts his head in his hands. For the first time since the telegram arrived 15 months ago, he lets himself cry. Not just for Kevin, for Klaus too, for all the young men who died in a war that should never have happened. And for the future, his son dreamed of a future Harold has been too angry to help build. May 20th. The Webster County Farmers Association calls an emergency meeting. Harold Brennan presides as chairman, but this time the energy in the room is different. Gentlemen, Harold begins, and his voice is steady. Despite the cost of these words, I owe this association an apology. And I owe James Hawthorne and Robert Crawford an apology. 2 weeks ago, I accused them of foolishness for trusting a German prisoner over university science. I was wrong. The room is silent. Everyone knows how hard this is for Harold. The treatment worked, Harold continues. The crops are recovering. Dr. Thornton from Iowa State confirmed it today. He's calling it a breakthrough in late blight management. And it came from a woman I tried to have reported as a saboteur. He pauses, swallows hard. I let my grief make me blind, make me cruel. My son Kevin died fighting for freedom and for a better world. And I dishonored his memory by choosing hate over understanding. I'm sorry. James stands up. Harold, we all understand. No one blames you. Maybe you should, Harold says. Maybe I need to be blamed. To remember that anger doesn't bring back what we lost. It just makes us lose more. The meeting passes a resolution, not just accepting the POW labor program, actively thanking the German prisoners for their contribution to Webster County agriculture. It's a small thing, but in the spring of 1946, in the shadow of a war that killed millions, it's also extraordinary. After the meeting, Harold does something he's been avoiding for 2 weeks. He drives to the Patterson farm. He finds Margaret in the barn cleaning equipment and, as always, Fräulein Muller, he says, in halting German. The pronunciation is terrible, but Marguerite understands. Mr. Brennan, she replies in English, equally halting. They stand facing each other. Former enemies, both parents to sons lost in war, both carrying grief that will never fully heal. I want to say Harold begins, then stops. He's not good with words. Never has been. I want to say thank you. For the crops. For helping my neighbors. Margaret nods. You are welcome. And I want to say, Harold continues, his voice breaking, I want to say I'm sorry. For my son, and for yours. For all the sons. Margaret's eyes fill with tears. She understands loss. Understands that some wounds never close. She steps forward and does something that shocks everyone who hears about it later. She hugs Harold Brennan, this grieving American father, this man who 3 weeks ago wanted her deported. Harold stands rigid for a moment, then his arms come up and he hugs her back. Two people who lost everything to war, finding a moment of shared humanity in an Iowa barn. When they separate, both are crying, but it's the kind of crying that feels like healing. The war take too much, Margaret says softly. We not let it take more. We build instead. Yes, yes, Harold agrees. We build instead. In the final part of our story, you'll discover what happened next. How Margaret's grandmother's method spread across America and then the world. How a German prisoner became an American citizen. How the three-part blessing saved millions of tons of potatoes and thousands of farms from bankruptcy. And how one woman's courage to speak up when she could have stayed silent changed agricultural science forever. But more than that, you'll see how this story proves something fundamental about America. That this country at its best doesn't care where knowledge comes from. It doesn't care about credentials or nationality or who your enemies used to be. It cares about results, about truth, about people who are brave enough to share what they know for the good of others. That's what made America great. Not military might or economic power. The willingness to listen to wisdom wherever it appears, even from a 34-year-old German prisoner of war whose grandmother couldn't have pointed to Iowa on a map.